Hello everyone, Happy New Year and welcome to the first VWO webinar in 2019. My name is Utkarsh Rai and I take up product marketing at VWO. I'll be moderating and presenting in today's session. For those who don't know, VWO is a conversion optimization platform which helps businesses in understanding the behavior of their website visitors and use that understanding in driving their conversion rates by running A/B tests. For this session, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter with today's hashtag AskVWO. You can also use GoToWebinar's question widget to ask us anything. We'll take them at the end of the session. For today's session, we're excited to collaborate with Appcues. We have Mr. Ben Winter, who is a growth marketer at Appcues, and Mr. Jeff Vincent, who is a senior product manager at Appcues. Appcues help businesses in improving user onboarding and feature activation without the need of any coding or developer help. Essentially, they help product and marketing teams to drive their customer engagement metric. We welcome you guys. In this session, we are discussing ways how to drive growth using in-app experimentation. So to briefly discuss the webinar flow, we have Ben and Jeff discussing about the embed framework, discussing about what are the different ways users can be onboarded and you can adopt and promote features, and how you can best utilize in-app messagings to engage with your users. Then I'll be covering up about the culture of testing and how you can shape a roadmap. So let's begin. I would request Ben and Jeff to take it over from here. Ben, over to you.
How's it going, everyone? Just to give a quick intro, my name is Ben Winter, as Carson mentioned. I focus on free trial conversion at Appcues, so I'm actually the Appcues user of Appcues, and focus mainly on conversion and making sure that users reach activation moment, and then working through improving their experience post-activation as well.
Great. It's a great intro, Ben. Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm one of the senior product managers at Appcues, and so that means what I focus on is making sure we're building a platform that solves problems for product managers, for product marketers. We're going to get into all those problems in this webinar, which I'm super psyched to talk about.
Absolutely.
But I thought we'd start here, Ben, just like why this is important.
Yeah, so as someone who's on the marketing team and focuses on growth, and I think working with Jeff hand in hand, in-product experimentation allows you to match the velocity between product and marketing. So the power of doing in-product experimentation allows Jeff to sort of work at the sprint speed that he and the development team work at, while also allowing me to sort of do faster iterations and quicker tests, and we can work in congruence on those sort of hypotheses and use the results that we find from those hypotheses to make changes to the in-app experience as well. So allows us to sort of go back and forth and match two different sort of velocities between product and marketing.
Yeah, that's right. And from a product perspective, I've always been jealous, right, of the feedback loops that marketing has. The speed at which we can be testing messaging and trying things out was always so much faster than product. And what's exciting about the work that we're doing is we're trying to enable product marketing and product teams to make some of these messaging changes, experience changes at the pace of thought, basically. Yeah. The way that you can come up with things to test is the same that you can implement them in the product, which is really exciting. And you also don't have to necessarily burden engineering teams, which are already busy enough with making some of these changes, which is really exciting stuff.
Absolutely.
So I thought we'd start here, just like the importance of focusing on these experiences. And the slide that sticks out to me, right, starting with the data, is how important retention is. This data comes from Mixpanel, and what they're comparing is elite SaaS companies to sort of median SaaS companies. We all want to be the elite company, and what sticks out to us about this data is that how similar the slopes really are.
Right.
In terms of staying activated after week one, but what really sticks out is this 1 week difference. Right. It's really about how steep the drop off is between the median companies and the elite companies in that very first week.
Yeah, I think this graph for me really highlights that, and this is what we end up focusing on in the free trials, that you have a week, really, which I think is your first session with a user, to really get them sold on your product and the value that your product can provide. And I think that it highlights the importance of demonstrating value and making sure the product's intuitive. And sure, you want the product, and Jeff and his team work really hard on making sure that everything is in the right places and the user can easily navigate from place to place. But that first time you come in, you usually need some help and some guidance, and that's where sort of in-app experimentation can really help, because we don't always know if the experience that we're providing through the tours we're providing are exactly correct, and experimentation allows us to sort of increase and get that number into the top 10% and really make a lasting impact as those users continue through their experience with our products.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other hard balance to strike, and I'm sure a lot of people out there struggle with this too, is we want our products to be powerful, to have a lot of functionality, and people are always asking for more. But yet, when someone starts on the very first day, you want them to come away with a really clear understanding of what it is that you do.
Right.
And it's hard. You don't build something, or it's very difficult, I would say, to build something in the product that just says, this is exactly what we do. It's very, very clear, because actually your products probably do a lot.
Right.
But with a really well curated first run experience, you can get the key points across, and you can start to think out a little bit further into how people discover some of this advanced functionality.
Yeah, and I think even more as your product matures, I think we're experiencing this now, as you increase the number of features, getting a user through that first core value experience actually becomes harder, right? Because there's not just one or two things in the navigation bar that they're looking at, there's 10 to 15, and as a result, though making sure they can get to the core features quickly as you mature as a product, it actually becomes more and more important. So even for younger companies that are just starting out to older companies who are building out more advanced features that are nested, this continues to be an iterative process that is really important and can really impact your user base.
So, okay, so Ben, you come in and you're taking over onboarding, or you're thinking about updating it. How do you go about doing it?
Yeah, so really sort of put together a team of people, which I think is the most important part. I think we're going to talk about the embed framework that we use at Appcues. It's part of our user onboarding academy, which is available online. You can sign up today. Small plug. And so I think the first thing that we do is we put together a team of people who can really sort of help put together a process, right? So I worked with Jeff, our senior product manager, also our head of product, Tristan, and our head of business intelligence, sort of put together a cohesive understanding of what are the main key behaviors that an event we want a user to experience, and then what's the data to back that up, right? So we looked at key moments from the product side, and then looked at the data in terms of how that led to retention and healthy customers, and sort of merged those two together, both the qualitative and the quantitative, and came to an understanding of where we wanted a user to get in their first session. And then so from that, we then mapped out what our current onboarding looked like, and then looked at the data in terms of how mapping the data to that onboarding. And then from there, once you sort of have a lay of the land, we put together a large journey map of where a user would go in our app, and what the sort of what the event ratio looked like. So how many people are, for us, is creating content or installing, what percentage of users are doing that. We then brainstorm tests to come up with new ideas to get those numbers improved, right? So sometimes we think about one event specifically, how do we improve the number of people who create content? And then some would be, how do we get someone to do X, Y, and Z? And those tests, some of them are more complex and some of them are easier. And so we tend to sort of prioritize what are quicker wins, easy things to get done, and then sort of work on the larger, more complex problems later. The next step, obviously, is to then execute on those tests, which I think Appcues really helps do in a very quick and iterative manner. And then, obviously, nothing's ever complete. Onboarding is an ongoing process. The product is constantly changing. Your users are constantly changing. And so you have to continually do this. So I would say about once every quarter, we redo our entire onboarding process to improve it in areas that we think we could do better.
And how much data? How much data we like? I guess everybody has a different sign up flow volume.
Right.
but how much data do you need to be confident in the results you're seeing?
I think it depends.
How do you think about it?
I think it depends on the amount of users you have, right? So obviously, if you're a B2C company and you have 10,000, 20,000 users signing up every day, you can do a lot more quick tests that are that can sort of drive to a certain behavior, a certain action. But if you're a lower volume, so if you're a B2B company in the activation space, you maybe only get 80 to 100 users a day. And I think the difference between those two is that you kind of have to let intuition guide you. If you have a lower number, you're not going to get a stat sig. By the time you try and do a test and get to the point where it is statistically significant, the entire product will have changed. So for us, if I waited for statistical significance on our user base, the product would be a year more mature, and thus everything would be obsolete that I'm doing. So there's no real value in that. I kind of have to trust the leading indicators, which are the certain behaviors we looked at that create a healthy customer, and just hope that and just use my best intuition based on feedback from product, feedback from our customer success team, from our sales team, from our marketing team, and sort of help drive those behaviors in the best way that I can. But there's no changing a button color to try and drive traffic. It's all much more qualitative and we like to call it concierge style testing.
I like that. So you're an onboarding expert and we are an onboarding company, right? So it's maybe somewhat obvious that we would spend a lot of time doing this, right?
Absolutely.
I just want to take a quick step back and talk about where most companies are at.
Yep.
And then we'll run back through the embed framework one more time.
Absolutely.
So just very quickly, because I've worked at companies just like this, where people think about onboarding as something that's going to fix everything,
Yep.
right? They think it's a silver bullet. They do a little bit of work, or they do a complete overhaul, and they just send it out.
Yeah.
Right? How do people get away from this idea? I mean, you mentioned it that we revisit things once a quarter. How do people get away from this idea of onboarding's one, going to fix everything, and two, just throw it all, like just make it all better and ship it?
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting parts that Appcues allows and where I fit into the structure of our product team is that I'm not actually on the product team, and as a result, I'm not biased by what I see every day. So when a new feature gets released, I haven't been developing it and working on mockups for 3 to 4 months, and I think as a result, I'm not biased to having lived in that thing for so long that I, as I go to look at what would be familiar to me and what I think would get me to understand this feature, I'm removed from that sort of weight of having developed it for 3 to 4 months. So I think that really helps. And I also think that for me personally, working with Appcues as a product, not to plug us too much, but I don't have to wait for the engineering team. So what ends up happening is that modals and tooltips and things that are not core features end up being sort of done quickly and hastily, and then also just put on the side, right? So you think this thing's going to solve your problem. You maybe want to make a couple tweaks to it because you noticed some change and you want it to be different. And then the product team tells you, well, we'll talk to you in 6 to 8 months. We're working on something else, and then you can't do anything about it. So this idea that it's a silver bullet, it may be a silver bullet, but it's an ongoing silver bullet. And as a result, you need a way to be able to quickly iterate and test on it. That isn't hampered by your development sprints. And so I think that where the pitfall comes is sort of this idea that this thing will solve all our problems, but my company's not structurally set up to actually have it solve all my problems. And I think that's where you run into this sort of collision of I want to help my users get where they want to go, but I also don't really have the structure to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And one of my takeaways is that a struggle that I've had as a PM, and I think a lot of PMs struggle with this, is we're really focused on the individual feature. Right. We want to make sure that piece is perfect. We want to make sure that the product works exactly as we intended. Yeah. And it's very difficult in that position to take a step back and think about someone who hasn't thought about this and talked about it for 6 to 8 months. What's their experience? Right. Exactly. And so the takeaway for me is to have someone, and you're in a great position, but people listening should try to find someone who is a bit of that outsider, right, who can play that foil to the excitement that I have about a brand new product and say, okay, yeah, this is great, but like, how does someone figure out how to make it work?
And I think part of the interesting part you mentioned about features is that a new feature to someone who's just joining a product for the first time is entirely different than someone who's lived in your product for 6 months. And understanding the difference between how a user who's never been in your product before will interact with that new feature as part of an entire suite of features versus someone who's used the entire suite of features you currently have, but is now using this brand new one. They're entirely different experiences. And what ends up happening a lot of time is companies will write an onboarding for a feature and not think about the divergence of those two processes, right? And so it ends up not resonating with either one group or the other, and both groups are very important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've talked to a ton of companies. We've pulled out some of the key problems that I bet you're experiencing too. One that I just want to call out before we move on is that onboarding tends to get done and then not get touched for a really long time, even though the underlying product is being changed, because we don't go through onboarding enough. And something that I think having that external partner and having a product like Appcues can do for you is it's iterative. It makes it very easy to make those small changes as you're doing new stuff.
Absolutely.
So we've introduced the problems. I want to go back through just very quickly the embed framework again. You establish your team. You figure out who needs to be on it in order to get the work done.
Keep it small and light. Sometimes these teams can get too large, and then I would argue for having a team of people who all have a focus and a specialty, but not too many people who are cross. We're trying to do multiple things at once.
Definitely. And then you're going to map out the current state and look at the data you have, and probably you'll find out you're missing some key data that you need, right? Which we did. Then you're going to think about what your test should be, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how you go about doing that in the right way. You're going to do it, and using a platform like Appcues that's separate from the product, it's easy, like you mentioned. And then, of course, the work is never done.
Absolutely.
And just to hit this over the head one more time, we did a study on key metrics for SaaS companies, and the takeaway for us was just how powerful an increase in activation and then retention can be on your revenue. Super quick wins to make just by thinking about that early experience.
Yeah, it's amazing the cascading impact of a 1% increase over time, right? So if you're doing a 1% increase cohort over cohort, especially when it's on activation and retention, can have a massive impact on your revenue. And it also has a massive impact on the marketing dollars you spend and sales dollars you spend, right? Because you spend a lot of money on getting these customers into your products, they buy it, and then they stay on and don't churn. It actually makes the impact of those dollars that you spent up funnel much more impactful.
And one other thing I want to call out on that is that last step of, if you onboard someone really well, they can speak to what your platform does, and as a result, they're better referral sources, right? Both internally as an internal champion and externally, which is just a really key part of growth. So the exponential value is there. Let's get into a little bit more about how you do it. Okay, so we talked about how important the data is. And Ben ran this process. So he's going to be a really good source to talk about how the heck do you get at this stuff? Because a key part of improving it, right, is understanding where it's going wrong, setting the right goals, etc. And so you put together a couple of questions that people should be asking.
So I think before you go and try and collect data, which I think is often a pitfall, give me all of the user behavior and give me all of the data. You're not going to get the right answers, and you're also going to waste, you're going to lose some political capital with the data people at your company. So I don't write SQL queries. I don't have access to our production database. So I need to get that from someone. And I think as a result, I went to them with really good questions and made sure the questions that I was asking were getting me the answers I needed. And then when I got the data from them, I was able to answer those questions and didn't have to go back and say, oh, I need to pull this thing. I forgot about this one thing. Oh, this is a good question someone else brought up. So I would urge, as part of asking these questions and thinking about what you want, to really think it through before you go and engage a head of business intelligence or a senior engineer who has access to a production database.
And really, this first question, understanding what makes a good long-term customer, this is something that everyone in the company should understand.
Absolutely.
And I think something that we did a good job of was taking a step back, taking the time to do it right, and then making sure that just like any marketing change, it was really well and consistently communicated internally.
Absolutely.
Everyone needs to be thinking about creating great long-term customers.
Absolutely. I think all of these questions are ones that once we got answers to, we actually presented in front of the entire company because they're very important to understand, and they're internally impactful across sales, marketing, CS, engineering, right? So these really, knowing the key things that drive healthy users, long-term healthy users, should be shared with the entire company. And I urge everyone to sort of communicate that internally once you find the answer to these questions. So outside of what makes a good long-term customer, what are the major events that these customers have in common, right? So what are the characteristics that make these customers long-term, like healthy long-term customers?
Mm-hmm.
What can be done in onboarding alone versus the product itself? I think that's a very, very important question. And there are things that are currently in sprint for our company that I thought were important parts of our product that needed to change, but I at least knew which ones I could touch myself and which ones needed to be done by the product team themselves. And having that understanding versus spending my time trying to fix something that may need to be fixed in product is important. You want to understand what you can drive as a behavior versus what someone like Jeff needs to come in and fix at a more structural level.
Yeah, and I think these last three questions are really getting at how does good onboarding sit as part of like the total experience that a customer has.
Absolutely.
And you really need to be in contact with those other teams to make sure that it's all working together cohesively. Right. It's all the same brand, right, but also that it's guiding a customer through sort of a logical discovery experience of what your product does, why you exist, and how they can leverage it.
Absolutely. And I think I would like to, for question 4, I think this is often a misconception about the term onboarding, is that it's confined to the first time a user registers for your product and signs up. And I think that is it can be a very harmful way of thinking about the onboarding process. So as part of our experience, when you sign up for Appcues, we send emails and follow-up messages based on behavior to try and get you back into the application. And I think it's really important to ensure that you don't think about onboarding as a 1-hour session, but as a ongoing process of onboarding the user and getting them to come back into your app. And so we send emails saying if someone has gone dormant for let's say a week, we email them, ask if they have any questions or what they need help with, and encourage them to get back into the product. And then when they come back in, we leverage what they've told us about what they're having trouble with to make sure that they understand that process. And that wasn't something that happened in the first experience, it happened in the second or the third. And so I would urge everyone to really think about onboarding is not just this one time, the first time a user logs in to the first time the user logs out, but really about this ongoing process until they reach that activation moment.
Okay, so we just threw a lot at you. You're probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed with what you're going to put in your onboarding experience. And something that we really wanted to point out is that it doesn't have to be perfect or completely comprehensive.
Absolutely.
This was some data that we got from MailChimp and our partners at AdRoll that actually just calling things out,
right,
and making sure that you're doing it at the right time can have a really big impact on, in this case, adoption. Right. So this is for a very specific feature, but you could see this applied to your overall onboarding experience.
Yeah, and that's sort of something that we mentioned earlier that I was talking with Jeff about, is that you think that, oh, this thing's in the navigation bar, a user will see it.
Right.
Maybe that's because you've lived in it for so long that you think they will, and oftentimes they won't. And so having a more abrupt call out that sort of points them in the direction is the only thing you need. And it's a simple thing, but as you look at the graph, it had a massive impact on their adoption.
Yeah, and so far we've been really talking about like first run onboarding, which I think is still important. We'll have to do a whole separate webinar on just product adoption, but obviously these little touches can have a really big impact. Another point that this is our data that's really important is sometimes the sort of intuitive experience that you want to have someone, the thing that you assume is most important for someone to experience actually may not have the biggest impact on retention. It is a little it is a little bit bizarre,
Yeah.
but it harkens back to why the data and trying many different things is a really important part of this process.
Yeah, and I would urge when you look at this data, sometimes you think that, oh, so inviting a user or publishing a flow, these things, we need to get that number up, and then we'll cause retention. But I think there's a famous I was at a talk by Mercy Grace from Slack, and she talks about how just getting someone to do something isn't necessarily good enough. They have to want to do it themselves, right? So you could point tooltips and throw modals up at someone and get them to do the publish a flow event, but they have to understand why they're publishing a flow, right? They have to want to do it. Just forcing them to do the event is not good enough, and actually maybe it'll show a higher percentage of users that are doing the thing, but it actually will probably drop off your retention and your long-term customer health.
So just for your context, the three analytics or the three events that we're looking at here are Appcues specific. One of them is publishing a flow, which is like what you create inside of Appcues as a flow. And so everybody probably has some notion of what the end user will create inside your product. The second one is activating an integration, right? So embedding our platform inside of your own marketing and product activities. And then the last one is inviting a user, inviting someone else to collaborate with you or help you get your account set up. And that had a massive impact on retention.
Right. And which makes sense, right? And those are sometimes where the intuitive concepts match the data, and there are times where the intuitive concepts don't match the data. And obviously, building out in-product experiences. Me, for example, I am not a designer, and so I need to have a designer who's involved. If I had built it myself, I probably would have gotten yelled at by our designer. So he needs to be involved in the product experience and sort of building that out. And so thinking about how your product fits into an organization and what activities are needed to utilize your product as best as possible will sort of help you think about what events and behaviors matter as you try and create long-term health with customers.
So a key takeaway from this slide is one, looking at your data and looking at all the data, not really getting like too pigeonholed, only thinking about what you want to drive the users to do. But then second, I think what you mentioned about setting context and setting the why for someone to take those actions is really important to creating like a story and a cohesive experience that the customer will go through.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there with that takeaway.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, another key takeaway is that Ben is not a designer.
Yeah, that is true. That is another takeaway.
Okay, one other data point that we wanted to share was about some things that we looked into around our flow length. So a flow in Appcues can be comprised of many steps, and our advice had always been shorter is better.
Right.
But another case where we really needed to also look at the data and not just go with our intuition. And so what you can see here is that it's true that when a flow has only a few steps, so maybe one or two, one to set appropriate context, two to direct the user, it has a really good completion rate. But there are important contexts, right, as you can see as the number of steps climbs, where completion rate is really high, where perhaps it's some sort of lock-in experience or a more complex experience for the user, but it's still really important and they're going through it.
Or it could show that, which I think what this sort of table strikes me as, is that throwing a ton of content into a one-step modal actually becomes more disengaging than if you break that content up into 2 or 3 pieces that are more consumable. So people are afraid or tend to drop off when you show them a long paragraph because it means they have to read a lot. So if you sort of break that up into smaller sentences, it actually ends up having a higher completion rate, and people end up actually consuming the content you're trying to push them.
Now, we're not advocating that people break every step of their flow into like a one-word thing or something like that, but it is about experimentation. It is about playing around with it to figure out what's best for the user, and it's about thinking about what type of experience you're about to guide people through.
Absolutely, and that's sort of the cool part about Appcues, which I find the power of. I can throw a piece of content that I'm trying to push a user to do into one modal, and if I see it's not really getting the job done, I can then easily break it up into 2 or 3 and sort of test and see which ones are working well and which ones aren't. And sometimes there are cases where a longer modal with longer content actually does perform better than having 2 or 3 steps. It sort of depends, and I think it's the power, not having to wait for my development team to test out that concept is really powerful.
So we're listening to a webinar. You and I are just blabbing on.
Yeah.
And we're hopefully getting you really excited to think about how you can improve your onboarding.
Yep.
But the real test is when you get off the phone.
Yep.
And you go back to your team and you try to make change. And you are going to run into problems, as we do all the time.
Bottlenecks are everywhere.
There are bottlenecks everywhere. And I think the biggest one that we see customers run into, right, when they're first coming to Appcues with this pain is, I mean, really, who on the line has an engineering team that's just saying, we have so much extra bandwidth. What could we possibly do with it? Has anyone ever come to you with that, Ben?
I wish.
I know.
I got a better chance of seeing a unicorn in real life than I do that.
I know no one has ever come to me with
that.
And Ben, the proper metaphor is a centaur.
Oh, excuse me. You know,
right. It would be nice to have, right? Half human, half horse, but it just plain old doesn't exist.
What's a centaur unicorn? I don't even know what
it's a centacorn.
Centacorn. Okay.
We're working on it.
We're working on it.
Yeah. And so what are the ways then that we're encouraging people to break these down, or how does Appcues play into it?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly a installation. Once you get installed with Appcues, you have removed a bottleneck in terms of creating experiences and driving users. So as we've talked about this entire presentation, Appcues really empowers your product managers and UX designers to ship these experiences without having to go through a sprint, right? I don't need to deploy code. I don't need to wait for code review. I can easily and quickly modify the modals and the content that I'm showing to users, and I can ensure that that if I want to make a change, I am empowered to do it on my own. On top of that, you want to make sure you have the right attributes when you install the first time, right? So oftentimes you won't send over, let's say for example, first name. So when you sign up for Appcues, we say welcome, and then we use your first name after you've given it to us. If I don't have that data being sent over the first time, I obviously can't then use that property. And so understanding the ways that you want to personalize the experience is important as you get set up. And then I think focusing on divergent thinking and testing, right? So what are different ways that I can take a user through an experience and get them to the same end goal? So one of the analyses that we're actually doing right now, which we didn't get done in time for this webinar, is are there different paths that a user takes and they get to the same point, right? So are they doing event A, event B, and event C, and then getting to activation, versus how many users are doing event C first and then doing event A and then event B? And so I think I often fall into the trap of I want the user to go through this experience in this very defined order, but often that could be wrong. And I think being okay with that being wrong and allowing for and being able to iterate and test on different ways of taking the user through a series of sort of experiences is important, and obviously requires a lot of complexity in changing and trying to get your engineers to do it every single week or every 2 or 3 weeks is it possible seeing a centacorn in real life?
I mean, I really wish that I could.
I know.
A centacorn with a cummerbund, that's really quite something. Well, what I'm hearing you say is if you front load the stuff right, if you do installation right, if you think ahead and figure out what you're going to need, again, to drive that data,
right,
then you get what you take out, and the PM in me has gone through this many times, you take out the need to go to a team that's saying, what exactly am I building?
Right.
With an exact answer.
Absolutely.
Right. It frees you up to say, there's a bunch of different things we want to try.
Yeah.
And we're going to know pretty quickly based on the data that we get back,
right,
whether we want to make a change.
Absolutely.
And you don't get that in it's going to take a 2-week sprint.
Right.
And plus we need to get it on the roadmap, and we're already way overdone.
Right.
Yeah, we're already way overbooked. And to your point, it has to be all figured out normally before you get to that planning level.
Absolutely.
And so I've experienced this myself. It forces you to go down this sort of logical rabbit hole, rather than being able to think divergently and creatively. And in case those terms make no sense to anybody, or they haven't thought about this before. Something that we try to practice internally is that thinking of like, let's go back to first principles and let's think about all the different ways that we can do this, as opposed to always thinking about it's got to be the same, or we can only build on what we've done before. Right.
This is a big part of design thinking in general, and then sort of changing how you think about product. Right. So, as part of this, we also use how might we phrases. Sure. So instead of trying to say we want a user to do X, it's how might we get a user to realize to invite another user, or realize that having their teammates on the platform are important. And so I think the divergent thinking part is important too, and we have sessions where people throw out crazy ideas, and no idea is a bad idea. And so as part of this exercise, I would encourage you to get a wide range of people into the room and have them throw out the craziest ideas in terms of like, maybe we get people to invite users not using the app or not using technology, but trying to do something that's offline, right? So, and I think that from that large swath of ideas, you end up finding common themes and driving down into something that can help you create a reality.
I think that's right. A really key experience that we had was getting into a room with just, I think it was the two of us, one of our customer success folks, and a designer, just with a whiteboard, and just say, how could we do it? And again, you don't get that experience when you're in front of the engineering team and they're asking, okay, so what exactly are we going to build?
Absolutely.
So another way that you can fix some of these bottlenecks is in thinking about what you want to build based on just borrowing some common UI patterns. Right. So people tend to. So now you have an idea. You've done this divergent thinking. Now, how do you go about building something? And we try to make that easy for you by providing some of the best examples of patterns that you can steal right off the bat.
Yeah, we don't try and. I think a common pitfall can be trying to create some brand new concept or new ideas that won't actually really help. So obviously everyone's seen modals before and they know what those are, and so we try to keep common UI patterns throughout our process and not try and change it up too much.
So the next big area of success that we've seen is in personalizing the product. And I think like a key message we've been hitting recently.
Love Sam Hewlett.
Shout
out to Sam Hewlett if you're out there.
Yeah, from my good friend Sam Hewlett. Check out his stuff at User Onboard. He asked this question on Twitter: what do you wish the software that you use would understand better? And basically everyone responded.
I think
that people want to know, or people want their software to know what you're trying to do.
Right.
And really, this goes back to that very first experience you're having in a product. If it can get to know you and can show you what you want to know immediately, you're going to stick with it. It's going to get you success faster.
Absolutely. So just some examples of ways that people are different and products should be too. We won't go through all these for the sake of time, but obviously there are, everyone's different. And I think what's interesting about these two different groups is that these are actually characteristics, but sometimes it's about what you're trying to do, right? So am I trying to create a new experience? Am I trying to analyze the results of an experience? And so I think you have to think about both who the user is, and maybe if it's data analyst coming to your platform, then obviously maybe trying to analyze versus build, but also allowing that user to sort of self-select them into what type of event or experience they want, and then drive them towards the data or the experience that they're trying to get to.
So the takeaway here is that personalization and personalized experiences are about way more than just getting their first name and jamming it into a modal.
Absolutely.
It's about trying to understand what, using whatever data you can, what the user is trying to accomplish and making it easy for them.
Absolutely.
So now we're going to bring Utkarsh back in, and he's got some stuff to share that VWO have done.
Thanks, guys. It's really great to know there's a lot of interesting stuff happening at Appcues. Thanks for sharing that. Glad you talked about segmentation, because we've been doing segmentation in a very different manner, using that data and everything. And there's one recent experiment which our product team ran very recently. To give you more context about that, let me just quickly discuss about what this product experimentation was about. So we recently launched this feature in surveys where you can apply different rules and conditions to improve your entire survey experience. So maybe you can add filters in a survey. You can basically apply rules. Maybe if for giving you a quick example, if say you have one survey on your e-commerce website and you want to use that survey to cater to both male and female audiences of all age groups and all that, you can set those parameters within the survey. So all the unnecessary questions which don't apply to one set of audience can be removed from the surveys while they respond to a particular question. Say, if we want to know about how female users use different apps, or how they use maybe want to buy a shoe which is red in color, so you can select options, apply rules like uh, anybody who's a female, you can ask first question as whether you're male or female, and then you can apply rules on the basis of that. So that was the feature which we recently built, our product team built. And we wanted to have feedback around how the entire UI of that feature should look like. So I have both the variations present. So we rolled out this feature. We did a phased rollout of this feature on a selected set of audience. So we applied the rule of segmentation there. And if you see on the before side of the screenshot, there's a lot of things happening there. And we wanted feedback in terms of how businesses would actually understand and use this feature, and whether they are actually understanding in terms of how to build that survey from scratch. So we also used a lot of different things to get that feedback, and most of them were features which are ingrained in VWO. So we started by using surveys to optimize our surveys. I know it's funny, but yeah, we built a survey to understand how the entire UI of this feature looks like. So we were collecting feedback in terms of whether they are able to make a question, whether it's easier to understand the UI, whether they understand the content or the messaging which we have mentioned on the app. So we were running surveys for that. We got good amount of feedback, objective feedback on it. I'll discuss about it more in the presentation. But then another thing which we ran was we tried to gather qualitative research data. Like we ran a heat map on this entire screen to just to see where our user is clicking while creating these surveys. So we were looking on different heat maps, and we're looking into how our users are kind of using this feature as an ad hoc thing. And then we also applied form analysis to understand how much time each visitor is spending on each of these form fields. So if you see in the after slide, and which is the improved UI of the same feature which we built, there are three major changes which we adopted. First thing was that a lot of users were going back and forth in the first UI which we built, because they need to copy the questions which they had in their question bank and then come back and paste those questions and then add more options to that. So first thing which we observed, that we need to add a section where they can import their question bank from the other surveys which they have built in within the app. Second thing which we realized was there was no way to preview the survey once it's built, and how the entire survey when it's run on, when it's live on your website, will look to a user who you want to serve the survey for. So that was the second feedback which we got through all doing all these visitor research capabilities using VW itself. So we realized that we need to give a preview option of the survey within the UI. So we built that. Then the third thing which we realized was that in the first UI which we built for the phased rollout, there's a lot of conditions which only engineers or people who have some understanding of applying if and or logic can only use that. So if you see in the before window, the UI is kind of mentioning about if logic, and logic, and then logic. So we try to ease that in a form of a modal, and how businesses can use it, how a user can use it in terms of simplifying steps for its survey. So these were three key feedback which came out of doing a phased rollout in a segmentation way. So that's how we use segmentation in our product development itself. uh, what it brings me to is to a point where I want to emphasize how product teams can leverage the culture of testing. And just to discuss that, this was one example which we picked up, that our product team ran multiple set of experiments, multiple set of tests to understand what our user is feeling, what how our user is behaving in terms of building a particular feature which we recently rolled out. Now, to emphasize on building a culture of testing for organization, there are a lot of things which this entire culture helps you with. First is that it helps you validate feedback. Now, this validation of feedback could be two ways. One is it's coming from your users, people who you directly want to sell to, or want uh, all the users who will be directly using your platform or services. And the second feedback comes within your team, so that you first run an idea through your team, you get everybody in a room, the way Ben and Jeff were talking about, that it's best to get everybody in a room, ideate, brainstorm about what things you want to run, what things you want to test, and then get buy-in from on those things from within your team. It helps you do two things. First, you have much better level of buying in terms of what to test and what not to test. And then also it helps you build a priority framework, saying that what are the things you will pick up first, and what are the things which can come later on in the entire process of testing. Then another thing which comes is that it helps you being iterative with the entire process. You know that you're testing on a small set, on a small sample group, so there's very little uh, chances that it can go wrong. Even if it can go wrong, then you can still manage that because it still was a small subset. Then another thing which culture of testing helps you is give you the opportunity to plot your own program by continuous feedback coming from your users, the continuous feedback coming from within your team. You can shape a roadmap or a testing program, which basically is a collection of a repository of ideas which you can run and keep improving on one after the another, depending on whatever outcomes it provides to you. And all these three things together helps you get to build a testing velocity where you are testing X number of tests, or where you're using the atmosphere or whatever you have built within the team to keep testing repeatedly and on everything you do as a team together. So maybe if you want to launch a UI of a product or a feature which you recently created, you would want to test different variations of that before you actually make it live for the entire audience. Also, say you have recently launched a new category page, then what all content should go on that category page should be tested first, in depending on different sample sets which you have coming to your site. So these are four key things which building a culture of testing helps you with. Now, a lot of people debates about that, we buy into the concept of building a testing culture, but it's complicated to get buy-in. So maybe you can put two conflicting ideas and just ask to test on a sample set. So that's the easiest way to get buy-in from people within your organization. Another thing which I get to listen a lot, that is that it delays the product roadmap. It just kills the rhythm which you have in terms of shipping products faster. So I think to solve that problem, what you can do is you can decide a small set, and there are a lot of different tools available. Even VWO provides a tool which is helps you identify a statistical significance of any experiment which you want to run, and depending on the amount of conversion which is satisfactory to you, which you think that I mean this level of experiment and this number of result will help you in convincing your team to deploy it, then why not you set that timeline and then run the experiment in that limit. So there are various that. Then another thing which I get to hear about a lot is that, what if my test gives me a negative result? So even if you get a negative result for a test, that's all right. I mean, you tested it on a small subset, and you realize that whatever you were about to implement was not going to work anyways. So instead of implementing it on the entire set, you did save a lot of money and a lot of revenue to your own company by running it on a smaller subset. And it doesn't matter if it gives you a negative result or not. Now, coming to some real world examples of how testing culture plays out in the real world, I have a couple of examples to discuss about. First example is of Netflix, and Netflix are big in doing running a lot of experiments. They use personalization in a very beautiful way, and the goal of Netflix is to increase lifetime customer value as they work on a subscription model. Now it's a metric which is difficult to optimize, and it will take them months or maybe different multiple quarters to see an impact. So to solve for that, they work on a model to predict churn by awarding churn scores to their users. So to measure a short-term behavior and use that data, and they use that data to predict long-term behavior of their users. So they basically define a metric of how they want to run experiments, how they want to optimize the entire user journey which they have. So you will realize that Netflix provides a very enriching model of giving value to their users. So it's like once you're in their experience, it's very difficult to get out, because they try to use personalization in a way that once you finish one episode or once you finish watching one movie, they'll recommend you more and more content which you can observe, and kind of gets you engaged within the app. Now, this is a great model, and which is a model which works on and providing enriched value to your customer or to your user. Then there's another company, which is Booking.com, which works on a very contrasting model. Uh, if you compare it with Netflix, like Booking.com's, the entire premise is on the basis of building urgency around whatever they are doing. So you go to their website, you saw a hotel room or you saw a hostel, and they would want you to book it immediately. And if you can compare both the models, it's very different from providing that option of rich experience of Netflix. Now, before you start to think about the right and wrong approach of defining your metric, I want to stop you right there. Because what the culture of testing helps you do is that it makes you open about deciding your own metrics. So one metric which is for improving the lifetime customer value, which is for Netflix, is a metric which contributes to their revenue. On the other side, Booking.com has a very different metric to follow. So I just want to mention that there is no right and wrong metric in terms of choosing how you plan your optimization, and building a culture of testing helps you do that. Uh, and after that, I want to discuss about the real value of building the culture of testing. And I want to share that there's no way you can lock a metric and then define how you run your optimization program. You can keep iterating it. You can have multiple different experiments defining metrics for each one of them, like we have done recently. Like we use our VWO in-app real estate to do multiple different things. Like as I discussed that, there was this one experiment on segmentation which we ran with our customers by doing a phased rollout to improve UI. There are other experiments which we keep doing within the app. One such experiment is a recent Chrome extension which we built uh, for our CRO customers. So what this extension does is it helps businesses to go to any website, and just observe and pick any idea which they see will resonate very well on their site. So they can just simply uh, go to any site, turn on the widget, select any component of any website and add it to their VW account as a testing idea or something to build a hypothesis. So this is one product adoption which we are driving through the app. Another example which we are using the in-app real estate is to cross-sell another sister product. So VWO is a product under the umbrella of Wingify, and we have another sister product called PushCrew, which is a tool for providing push notifications to businesses. So we're helping we're using the VWO in app to promote the other platform PushCrew, and which helps us in using the cross selling opportunity brilliantly. So yeah, with these two examples, I want to share that there are multiple different ways you can use the in-app real estate. There are multiple different models or metrics which you can use in driving experiments. Personalization and segmentation is something which is at the center of it, because it just helps you target your audience better. It helps you drive uh, multiple growth initiatives, multiple growth uh, experiments together, and you can use all of these different aspect modals and ideas to keep running and driving engagement on your website. So with that, I conclude my presentation. uh, just to discuss a few key takeaways which you guys have from this presentation is how to use the embed framework. Ben and Jeff quickly discussed about establishing a team, mapping your onboarding data, brainstorming, testing ideas which you can run within the app and execute them and keep doing it again and again. Then we discussed about various different bottleneck and how you can ease them uh, by empowering your product and UI team, by getting right with the attribution, and focusing on divergent thinking and continuously doing testing. And we're concluding with how building a culture of testing can help businesses in building an atmosphere to test before they go ahead with any of the development or execution side of things. So with that, I open the session for Q&A. I see a lot of questions coming in already, but I have a question for Ben and Jeff to start with. Maybe we can take that first. Want to understand, Ben, that what are the most common things which businesses are doing wrong about their onboarding process? I'm sure you must get to see a lot in terms of what your customers are doing in terms of promoting onboarding. Can you highlight a couple of things which businesses are going wrong with and they need to improve on?
Yeah, I think the two big ones that I can talk to quickly are set it and forget it, which is that it's a one-time thing. So they'll spend all this time working on this onboarding, then they will leave it and they won't touch it again. And the other is sort of creating too complex an experience, right? So part of onboarding is also personal discovery and figuring out what you want to do. And I think that sometimes you try and direct the user too much and hold their hand too much versus suggestions and sort of pushing people towards an idea that they need to discover on their own, which is sort of the example I gave earlier about publishing a flow, right? You have to understand why you want to publish a flow, not just that you do the action. So making sure there's the thought behind the behavior.
Great. So we have a lot of questions coming in. So buckle up, Jeff and man. So first question is coming from Gulharme Pereira. He's asking, when the aha moment takes a long time to reach within a product, how can we deal with that? He also has a suggestion that I think about using videos to show the aha faster rather than just waiting for the engineering to make changes in the product. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've tried that before. It's a very difficult question. There's no hard and fast rule here. What I would say, though, is going back to something that Ben said earlier, you have to set the why. You have to set the hook that makes people interested. And the video can be really good at that. It can be really good at doing it fast, but it doesn't do the whole thing. If people don't actually take the action, they don't really get the real value.
Absolutely.
We do work with customers who have really complex products, and they have flows or experiences that are multi-step. It may take a while to get to the aha moment, and so what they're trying to do is set up the hook early, get people to know what the anticipated outcome is and why it's valuable, and then go through the necessary steps so that the customer actually creates whatever it is that gets them that value, get them to that end step for real.
Yeah, break it into sizable chunks, right? So our aha moment is usually 15 to 20 days after they sign up, and basically try and create mini aha moments in that to get them to that point. So instead of thinking of it as one moment only, like think about little smaller aha moments that keep them coming back to get to that end goal.
Great. Another question is coming from Kyra. Kyra is asking, what is the core group of stakeholders you need around the table for improving onboarding processes?
Yeah, it's another really good question, and it's probably going to vary depending on how your organization is set up. But for us, this is what we had. We had Ben, who is going to be the implementer and sort of the ringleader of the whole thing. Myself, who's thinking about where the product is going to go and what the core purpose is for customers, right? So that we're addressing that early. We had Tristan, our lead designer, who's thinking about the overall experience across the entire product. And we had Andy, our one of our BI folks, who's thinking about what data do we need and how can we get it.
Yep. And I think we had buy-in from the executive team as well. I think that's always important, right? So
sure.
This is an important initiative, and to get that group of people into a room, you obviously need top-down, a mandate from the top down that this is an important message.
Well, hopefully we've given you the data to show why that's important.
Exactly.
The thing that I would counsel folks around is it's important to have cross-functional folks involved, but if you have too many people, you won't get to results.
Absolutely.
And so my advice is think about the most critical people that need to be there, and then be quite confident about keeping that group small. Otherwise, you're going to end up with an onboarding that's designed by consensus, and it's not going to be a fun or fluid experience for your users.
And I would say, like, I went and spoke with sales and marketing and CS, but I didn't. They weren't in the meeting. So I think it's important to get their perspective, but I don't think you necessarily need to have them in all those sessions.
All right. Another question is coming up from Samir. Samir is asking, what approach do you recommend for setting up a product to test both in-app messages and feature changes? Example, content changes without layout changes, A/B testing, 2 recommended algorithm with minimum engineering involved. So let me take that question.
Sure.
What he basically tries to understand is how do you approach setting up tests in product and in app messaging. So I think you can take the app messaging part because that's not how tests are being set up within the app. But yeah, you can definitely A/B test 2 different pages, 2 different layouts, and maybe even build 2 different variations of the same feature which you want to test, and then segment it on the basis of a value which you can define as a custom value within your experiment, and then use that custom value to define it as a trigger condition for running an experiment. Maybe you can talk about, maybe Ben, you can talk about how you can do that within an in-app messaging.
Yeah.
We both want to talk about
it. Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
No, we both want to talk about it. One thing I would really encourage people to do, and again, this is why we build Appcues, is lay out the entire experience that folks are having.
For sure.
Because again, if you join a product, you just signed up for a product and you're getting messaging about a brand new feature, it's like, that's not important to me, right? And that kind of stuff can happen really easily when you start having multiple flows going on, when there's multiple campaigns, it's going across different channels. And so having all this stuff laid out in front of you and having a really cohesive, I guess, view of, okay, what messages are really important to send to the customer, and how are we going to get those across? And partnering with something on your marketing side, something that enables experimenting on the marketing side. And you can use Appcues actually to track and pass those user properties into your in-app messaging, means that folks get a cohesive experience all the way.
And clear cohorts of users, right? So as Jeff mentioned, like new users probably shouldn't get new feature adoption. They should get the new user experience, and then if they're an older user, they can probably get a feature request. So I think it's also thinking about the cohort of users and making sure that those are clear and they don't overlap.
Great. Another question is coming up from Miriam. Miriam is asking, how do you use live chat such as Intercom or GoSquad to leverage free trial optimization?
So can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, Miriam is asking, how do you use live chat such as Intercom to leverage free trial optimization?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not something that we do at Appcues. We use in-app messaging instead, mostly because we just don't have people who can be available all the time. And we have signups coming in 24 hours a day, so we want to make sure that experience is consistent. I've experimented with it before, and really what you end up finding out is the questions are very consistent, and what you should do is take as many of those questions as you can and turn them into static resources that people can access at their leisure, because no matter how fast your live chat is, it'd be a lot better if it was just obvious from the start.
If you have to handhold people through a live chat to use your product, you're probably going to have trouble scaling.
All right. Another question is coming up from Tim. Tim is asking, any thoughts on presenting a 5-star survey with comment box after completing onboarding?
Tim, you get the last question. Way to go. We don't do something like this, but this is something that Appcues actually provides. We should try it.
Yeah, it's actually
asking for feedback at the end of some of these key flows is really, really important, and it can give you a sense of how the end user is experiencing it. We use our own NPS product to get feedback, and we do it at the 90-day mark, so we get a sense of sort of that broader onboarding picture. But it depends on where people end off. I would say on that onboarding flow, if the last thing you leave them with is, okay, go take this action, but before they can take the action, you're asking for a rating and feedback. It's kind of like when a mobile app is bugging you before you've even used it. So it's a tricky balance, but I would say if the aha moment is somehow delivered as part of the onboarding flow and then it comes back around, that could work really well.
I would actually probably use an email follow-up and ask them about that.
It's not a bad idea.
So it's out of the app and it's not part of the experience anymore. I wouldn't want to be, you may cause some confusion, and you may also, you may turn a user away from doing the next part of the onboarding experience they want. So I would actually follow up with an email.
And you know, one thing I would add to that is you should be measuring behavior on the first run experience and not kind of adding things that you're asking from them that you don't need to. But I think there is opportunity in a second or a third or a fourth login to ask, okay, so now you're coming back in a little bit more, you're activated, hopefully. What's stopping you from becoming an engaged or advanced user? How is that experience for you, and how could we have made that happen faster? So that kind of stuff, it's all targeting stuff you can do in Appcues that pushes a little bit later. We do some of that. That's how I would think about it.
Yeah, I think it's better than asking for a 5-star rating, which you may not really get the answers that you're looking for.
They maybe haven't used it yet.
Yeah,
I mean, 5-star rating for your onboarding doesn't mean much if the behavior doesn't match. So something to keep in mind, Tim.
Yeah, another thing which I would want to add to this is that a lot of businesses may set triggers once the onboarding is done. So maybe if you want to have some level of feedback, so maybe you can use the completion of onboarding as a trigger, and then you can use multiple web survey services, like VWO also provides a web survey application. You can use that and then use it as a trigger, and then maybe run a survey post 14 days or say 30 days after the onboarding. Also, a lot of other tools. If you're looking for a rating of your platform, then you can use a lot of integrations like Trustpilot and TrustRadius provide Zapier integrations with your system. And once somebody is onboarded, you can use that integration to send them an invitation to review you, maybe 30 days after the onboarding, till the time they have used your platform to some extent. So yeah, there could be some few other ways which how you can use a survey post the completion of your onboarding. Another question is coming up from Ali Salman. Ali is asking, if you have a training application, then how would you make it interesting for people to use our application, as it is human nature to avoid such applications?
Of course, this is the last question we can take. We have another meeting starts in a minute. So can you just repeat the question, and I'll be sure to provide an answer.
Sorry.
Can you repeat the question? We have a meeting. We have another meeting that starts in a minute because we're over by 15. So I just want to make
Sure. This is the last question.
Yep. Repeat it, please.
Ali Salman is asking, if you have a training application, then how would you make it interesting for people to use your application, as it is human nature to avoid such applications?
So I think I actually we move away from train applications. I think part of the power of Appcues is that it can be in the actual product. So the training can be a part of the product experience. So I actually agree that the training apps are not very much fun, and they end up being boring, and they disengage users. And so the power of Appcues is that you can actually merge that training content into the actual application. So as the user's building and doing things that are applicable and real to them, they can then feel empowered and enjoy the experience, versus having to go through an entirely separate experience and then go and join the application and then start redoing all the processes. Appcues allows us to provide training while they're also doing things they want to do. So it ends up being super powerful in that sense.
All right. Sorry guys, we are 15 minutes over the presentation time, and thanks everybody. Thanks Ben and Jeff for taking out the time to come here and share your experience with us. Thanks to all the attendees for attending the session. We'll come back again very soon with another pressing subject and insights from the world of conversion optimization. Till then, keep optimizing. Bye bye.
Thanks.